Thank you. This is my last song. Congratulations, everybody. I hope you have a lovely weekend. And if you're going to party tonight, I'll probably be in town singing somewhere. So say hello. When the night is calm and the land is dark, and the moon is the only light we'll see. No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. This is wrong. If you stand by me. Darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Won't you stand now? Stand by me. If the sky will fall, should tumble and fall, and the mountains should crumble to nothing. I won't cry, I won't cry, no, I won't shed tears. This is wrong. You stand by me. Darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. Stand by me. Whenever you're in trouble, won't you stand by me? Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me. Have a good ceremony, everybody. Congratulations.
Graduation ceremony. Please ensure that all electronic devices are switched off. Graduates, you are reminded that with the assembly, please stand for the entrance of the academic procession.
President, members of the official party, members of staff, distinguished guests, graduates and guests, good morning. Welcome to this graduation ceremony for the College of Science and Engineering. Would you please remain standing while the national anthem is sung by Ms Tammy Moxham.
Australians, oh let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every state advance Australia fair. In joyful strains and let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Will the Assembly please be seated? Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Indigenous Education and Strategy, Professor Martin Nakata, Member of the Order of Australia, will now present an acknowledgement to country.
James Cook University has a long-standing tradition in acknowledging and paying respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have occupied Australia for 60,000 years. Indigenous people's relationships to their countries and seas rests on the understanding that the earth is our mother, the mother that gave birth to us all and provides for us every day. The knowledge accumulated by Indigenous Australians over millennia should speak to us all about the importance of the land and seas on which all our lives and those of future generations still depend. James Cook University takes great pride in this important part of our Australian heritage, and as graduates of this university, I sincerely hope that you will carry this understanding forward throughout your lives. Thank you, and congratulations on your achievements.
We are assembled here today to acknowledge James Cook University degrees and awards. This opportunity to introduce members of the official party. My name is Ceremony Marshal. From my right, Professor Ron White, Acting Dean of the College of Science and Engineering. Professor Christine Bruce, Dean of Graduate Research. Deputy University Secretary and today's Mace Bearer, Ms Giselle Bobink. University Chancellor, Mr Bill Tudell. Vice Chancellor and President, Professor Sandra Harding, Officer of the Order of Australia. University Provost, Professor Chris Coughlin. Professor Stephen Naylor, Chair of the University's Academic Board. Seated behind the official party are members of the university staff. Chancellor, I invite you to address the Assembly.
Good morning. I warmly acknowledge today Professor Sandra Harding, AO, our Vice-Chancellor and President, Ms Andrea Della Matea, our distinguished occasional speaker. Andrea has a remarkably successful professional career and strong connection to JCU as one of our outstanding alumni and as a member of our Singapore Campus Advisory Board. Andrea is in fact based in Singapore, and we are very grateful she was able to produce and record an address for us which will be played. Our outstanding graduate speaker. In fact, Alex's academic prowess was apparent from a very young age. Alex was just 15 when he started his Bachelor of Science Studies at JCU's Begaboo Yumba campus, as the Townsville campus was now known. I acknowledge members of the official party, gentlemen, parents, and most important of all, our graduating students. A big thank you also to Professor Martin Nakata AM, another one of JCU's outstanding alumni, for his warm and evocative acknowledgement to country. Martin has made and continues to make a very significant contribution to Indigenous education. James Cook University conducts its business on the lands and seas of many of Australia's First Nations people. It's therefore with gratitude that I also acknowledge the traditional owners of those lands and seas, their rich cultures and their unique knowledge of our natural environment. Warm thanks too to Tammy Moxon for her stirring rendition of our national anthem and for her excellent pre-ceremony entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, there are many good aspects of being Chancellor of my alma mater, a role I began in fact 5 years to the day ago. One of the very best though is presiding at graduation ceremonies. 2020 by any definition was a tough year, with COVID-19 altering fundamental aspects of our lives and bringing devastation and disruption to the world. Our hearts go out to all who have suffered loss and continue to do so because of the pandemic. The pandemic prompted a fundamental rethinking and rejigging of how JCU goes about our business. The way our JCU community responded was nothing short of outstanding, a heartening affirmation of what we can achieve when we all pull together and support each other. 2020 was also, of course, our university's 50th anniversary year, and as a result of the COVID-19 restrictions, many of the planned celebrations, along with our graduation ceremonies, had either to be cancelled, to be postponed, or celebrated in virtual ways rather than in person. All this meant that we weren't able to give many of our students the live graduation ceremony that you richly deserve. Happily, though, the time-honoured tradition of gathering together with your graduating cohort, along with family and friends, and marking the occasion with ceremony and applause, has arrived, and we have the opportunity to honour and to celebrate your successes. So I take great pleasure in welcoming you and in congratulating you wholeheartedly on your achievements. In doing so, I also acknowledge with gratitude the family and friends whose love and support have helped bring you to this milestone in your lives. Ladies and gentlemen, a brief note about something you will notice later in the ceremony. James Cook University has always been very proud to celebrate the diversity of cultures and customs that make up our university community and landscape. So it's very special for us to honour and celebrate these deep spiritual connections through a sashing ceremony that we hold just before each graduation ceremony to acknowledge the academic achievements of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. You will see those students proudly wearing their sashes as they come to collect their awards today. In common with other leaders of our universities, I place great emphasis on acknowledging the past, the present and future contributions which Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities make to the broader fortunes of our community, and the university recommitted this focus through the announcement last year that we would be adopting Indigenous language names for each of JCU's campuses in North Queensland, names gifted to the university by local First Nations communities. I was very proud to participate in these ceremonies and to acknowledge the role of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the advancement of our university as part of our 50th anniversary celebrations. And as we embark upon the next 50 years together, James Cook University's relationship with First Nations communities will remain a central focus of our commitment and of our endeavour. Reflecting on our own history as a university, on the 20th of April this year, next month, we wrap up our 50th anniversary year since the Queen signed in person the Act which created James Cook University in an historically, literally unique, one only action for which my wife Chris, who's with us today, and I were both present in Townsville. Last year we also celebrated 60 years of providing higher education in North Queensland. So These days, ladies and gentlemen, JCU ceremonies like graduation ceremonies are dignified and relatively formal events. It seems it wasn't always so. One of our clever JCU staff recently drew my attention to a report that during the speeches at the opening of the University College of Townsville in 1961, the audience gained their first experience of university student pranks when, during the official speeches, students thought it would be highly amusing to lower a series of animals, securely harnessed, I'm assured, from the top of the building right where these speeches were taking place. Students also let off a single loud firecracker nearby. The audience, it seems, from the records, were quite bemused. So I'm relieved that today's generation of JCU students, you, are so much better behaved than your predecessors, particularly given that we are live streaming this event. A lot has changed, certainly, over the decades, and JCU has played a part in many positive developments in our immediate region and across the tropics, in fulfilment of our truly visionary mandate to be Australia's university for the tropics. JCU has grown to be a world leader in education and research on the tropics. We have become a vibrant, multi-campus university, a long way from the humbler institution at which I commenced studies in 1968. In our 50 years as JCU, over 50,000 graduates have proven the success of the JCU approach to teaching, learning, and to research. Our graduates have made significant contributions everywhere you look, playing vital roles in business, as educators, diplomats, vice-chancellors, chancellors, health professionals, community leaders, scientists, chief executives. The point I'm making is that in graduating today, you are joining the ranks of some very high-achieving JCU alumni. To name just a few, Professor Jamaluddin Jompa, one of Indonesia's top scientists, specialising in marine and environmental science. Engineer Larissa Brown, who is project manager at the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority and was a 2017 Outstanding Alumni Award recipient. Leading scientist, Professor Tony Bassick, director of the La Trobe Institute for Agriculture and Food and a 2010 JCU Outstanding Alumni recipient. And Professor Katya Bazaka, since graduating, Katya's contributions to the field of plasma nanoscience and the application of plasmas to solve complex real-life challenges have been significant and have evolved to encompass major challenges of the time. Katya received a JCU Outstanding Alumni Award in 2020. I could go on, you're relieved I won't, with impressive examples of those who have gone before you as JCU graduates making a mark on the world, but I will let those few examples illustrate my point. Ladies and gentlemen, especially given that my wife Chris and I are both graduates of JCU, a particularly pleasant aspect of my role is to welcome all of you, JCU's new graduates, into our alumni family. JCU's 50th anniversary comes to an end, we can be confident made and will continue to make a significant difference to our community. One of the most uplifting of my roles as Chancellor is seeing you walk across the stage to receive your awards. That will be the time for your family, your friends, your supporters to applaud and cheer you with all the gusto and energy that they can muster. But please, no firecrackers. Wherever you are in the world, please do keep in touch with JCU. I and my wife Chris, both of us are very glad we did, and we, like many others, look forward to hearing of your successes and your adventures in the future. Thank you.
Chancellor, I invite the Chair of the Academic Board, Professor Stephen Naylor, to present graduating students.
Would all graduating students please stand? Chancellor, I certify to you and to the University that all graduates standing before you today have fulfilled the requirements prescribed by the University, and I ask that they be recognised as having been admitted to their respective awards.
In the name of the University Council and by my authority as Chancellor, I recognise candidates so approved and congratulate and warmly welcome you as James Cook University alumni.
Will all graduates please be seated?
Chancellor, a Doctor of Philosophy degree takes a special place in our graduation ceremonies. It is one of the highest qualifications which the University awards. This degree is awarded for the successful completion of a significant piece of independent research, sustained in its scholarly character and one which makes an original contribution to the field. External examination is always involved. 22 candidates will be presented this morning. Professor Christine Bruce, Dean of Graduate Research, will present the graduates to you, and Professor Stephen Naylor, Chair of the Academic Board, will read their thesis abstracts.
Barnti Quinn Quinn. Dr. Barnes' studies were undertaken in the discipline of aquaculture under the supervision of Professor Dean Jerry, Professor Carl Zenger and Dr. Jose Domingos.
Chancellor, Dr. Barnes studied several reproductive biological processes in barramundi related to gonadal development, sex differentiation and sex change. She described the morphological changes and expression patterns of the important sex-related genes during these processes. She found the time window for manipulating barramundi gonads using exogenous steroids for sex control purposes. Chancellor, I present Dr. Barnes.
Stacey Beerwagen. Dr. Beerwagen's studies were undertaken in the discipline of marine science under the supervision of Professor Colin Simpfendorfer, Dr. Michelle Heipel, Dr. Andrew Chin and Dr. James Maloney.
Chancellor, Dr. Beerwagen studied how reef sharks utilise and influence coral reef ecosystems. She found that reef shark populations are stable and have distinct food web lengths and prey compared to other predatory fish on the Great Barrier Reef. This information benefits an understanding of reef shark roles on coral reefs. Chancellor, I present Dr. Beerwagen.
Geet Bodhinayaki. Dr. Bodhinayaki's studies were undertaken in the discipline of civil engineering under the supervision of Professor John Ginger and Dr. David Henderson.
Chancellor, Dr. Bodhinayaki studied the internal and external pressure fluctuations in industrial buildings during windstorms. He found that uncorrelated peak internal and external pressures generate large net pressure on the building structures. The Australian Steel Institute and building designers will use these results to optimise industrial building design. Chancellor, I present Dr. Bodhinayaki.
Michael James Bradley. Dr. Bradley's studies were undertaken in the discipline of natural and physical sciences under the supervision of Professor Marcus Chave, Dr. Adam Barnett and Dr. Ronald Baker.
Chancellor, Dr. Bradley investigated how fish use habitat under different environmental conditions. He found that the tides, water quality and surrounding landscape work together to determine whether habitats like seagrass and mangroves are used by fish. Fishery organisations in Australia and Papua New Guinea are using his results to manage key species. Chancellor, I present Dr. Bradley.
Bud studies were undertaken in the discipline of aquaculture under the supervision of Professor Dean Jerry, Dr. Nicholas Wade, and Dr. Jose Domingos.
Chancellor, Dr. Budd studied the epigenetic effects of temperature on sex change in barramundi, revealing the first evidence for temperature-induced epigenetic changes in the gonads of sequential hermaphrodites. Dr. Budd's results further our understanding of sex change in fish and highlight the potential for temperature as a sustainable method for sex control in aquaculture. Chancellor, I present Dr. Budd.
Kevin Crook. Dr. Crook's studies were undertaken in the discipline of marine science under the supervision of Dr. Adam Barnett, Dr. Marcus Shaves, and Dr. Katia Abrantes.
Chancellor, he found that differences in system engineering and bioturbulation roles of sympathetic are complementary and are critical for maintaining sandflat ecosystem functioning. Chancellor, I present Dr. Ecology and the efficacy of monitoring techniques. Challenges were discussed and guidelines provided for stakeholders to achieve improved conservation outcomes. Chancellor, I present Dr. Groom.
Dr. Humphrey's studies were undertaken in the discipline of civil engineering under the supervision of Professor John Ginger and Dr. David Henderson.
Chancellor, Dr. Humphreys studied internal pressures in buildings generated in windstorms. He found that understanding the constructive features of a building, such as cladding materials, building volume, and the envelope porosity, can improve the prediction of internal pressures. Wind loading standards are
Mohamed Jaditega. Dr. Jaditega's studies were undertaken in the
investigated the feasibility of stabilising soft dredged mud that is used as land reclamation fill using geopolymer binders. He found that the geopolymer mud, his study results can be used to produce reclaimed ground that is more stable and consolidates faster. Chancellor, I present Dr. Jaditega.
of Natural and Physical Sciences under the supervision of Associate Professor Mia.
Studied the thermal performance of corals and found that they generally perform suboptimally at current temperatures. However, she also observed considerable variation amongst colonies, with some colonies that performed better, providing a glimpse of hope for the future of coral reefs. Chancellor, I present Dr. Jurian.
Jacqueline Denise Lau, Doctor of Agriculture, Environmental and Related Studies, under the supervision of Professor Joshua Sinner, Dr. Christina Graham, and Dr. Georgina Gurney.
Chancellor, Dr. Lau investigated how people perceive, access, and articulate issues of justice around the use of coastal ecosystems, differ between and within communities. Her study extends ecosystem services theory to promote fairer conservation.
Dr. Vanessa Mesmer, Dr. Julian Cayley, and Dr. Camille Mellon.
Chancellor, Dr. Matthews studied outbreaks of the crown of thorns starfish on the Great Barrier Reef. He developed a number of modelling and simulation tools to help predict when and where costs are managed and controlled on the Great Barrier Reef. Chancellor, I present Dr. Matthews.
Rachel Miller. Dr. Miller's studies were undertaken in the discipline of marine science under the supervision of Associate Professor
Marine migratory species in Eastern Australia. She found gaps in the managing of these species and identified several barriers preventing stakeholders from participating in their management. Her results can help harmonise and improve environmental management in Australia. Chancellor, I present Dr. Miller.
Studies were undertaken in the discipline of information technology and Professor Ian Atkinson.
Chancellor, Dr. Moring developed a prototype of a novel, scalable, low-cost sensor system for streetlights that could monitor the surrounding and allow streetlights to dim when roads are not in use.
Renato Moraes Arreo. Dr. Maraistareo's studies were undertaken in the discipline of natural and physical sciences under the supervision of Professor David Bellwood, Professor Sean Connolly, and Dr. Nicholas Graham.
Chancellor, Dr. Areo developed a method to quantify the productivity of coral reef fish, fishing and climate change on the amount of fish that coral reefs produce. This method can be used to improve assessments of critically important but increasingly threatened tropical fisheries that sustain millions of people. Chancellor, I present Dr. Areo.
Maria George Nafer. Dr. Nafer's studies were undertaken in the discipline of natural and physical sciences under the supervision of Professor Kyle Zenger, Professor Dean Jerry, Dr. David Jones, Dr. Curtis Lind, and Professor John Benzie.
Chancellor, Dr. Nafer investigated the effects of domestication on the Ababassa strain of Nile tilapia. She found that despite the high error rates in pedigree records, the Ababassa strain is salvageable and the production enhanced. World Fish is using the results of her study to improve management of the Ababassa strain and plan dissemination efforts for the line in Egypt. Chancellor, I present Dr. Nafer.
Jodie Ann Schlafer. Dr. Schlafer's studies were undertaken in the discipline of marine science under the supervision of Professor Mike Kingsford and Dr. Eric Wolanski.
Chancellor, Dr. Schlafer studied box jellyfish. She flew by only tens of kilometres, challenging the paradigm that jellyfish populations are well mixed over large distances. The occurrence of box jellyfish is unpredictable because their abundance is influenced by the conditions at the small spatial scale of stocks. Chancellor,
were undertaken in the discipline of environmental studies under the supervision of Dr. Michelle Heupel, Professor Colin Simpfeldorfer, and Professor Marcus Shade.
Chancellor, Dr. Schlaff studied the spatial ecology of black far more patchy way than previously thought. This study provides new ways of monitoring coral reefs as they face a challenging future. Chancellor, I present Dr. Strite.
The discipline of civil engineering under the
as sand and cement replacement in concrete. She found that the addition of glass sand. Cairns Regional Council has implemented her research on their concrete footpath as a trial with pleasing results. Chancellor, I present Dr. Tamana.
Dr. Norman Duke.
Chancellor, in mangroves using satellite imagery, field data and generalised additive models. He found that satellite location, frequency of observation and spatial methods for detecting phenology and processes of data-driven approaches.
Anne-Marie Bauer-Civiello. Dr. Bauer-Civiello's studies were Mark Hammond,
and therefore provides management-relevant data to monitor and reduce plastic before it arrives in the ocean. Chancellor, I present Dr. Bauer-Civiello.
Chancellor, with us this morning, I'd like to invite them to stand and acknowledge the efforts of
concludes the
Chancellor, I call it
Doble. Yang O'o. Redford. Christy Starr. Chancellor, I present a graduate awarded the degree of Diploma of Tertiary Studies
Isaac Whaley Lombardo. Graduates admitted to the degree of Bachelor of Advanced Science. Emily Washington. Michaela Wright. Jade Arnold. Bowden. Matthew Connors. Awarded the Australian Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology Prize, Riley Dorney. Chancellor, I present graduates admitted to the degree of Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Science with distinction, awarded the Geoffrey Clark Prize in Anthropology, Monica Donoghue. Stuart Hodgson. Chancellor, I present graduates admitted to the degree of Bachelor of Business and Environmental Science, Johan Magnuson. Chancellor, I present a graduate admitted to the degree of Bachelor of Business and Environmental Science with distinction, Rachel Chapman. Kelly Best. Darnica Bryce. Amanda Dendis. Jason Pye. Brody Slavin. With distinction, Travis Bailey. Alicia Walter. Chancellor, I present graduates admitted to the degree of Bachelor of Information Technology, Azarahe Varkai. I present graduates admitted to the degree of Bachelor of Marine Science, Sean Blanchfield. Bronte Klassen. Brianna Osborne. Kira. Adam Walker. Atikwa Harrison. Madeline Miller. Eleanor Saltwell. Degree of Bachelor of Science with distinction. Catherine Slaughter. Shyla Velora. Lee Wojtak. Al Sungtron. Al Zayed Salah. Chancellor, this concludes the presentation.
No.
Chancellor, this concludes the presentation of a university medal.
Speaker, Ms. Andrea Della Matteo. Every person and every organisation on the planet, Bachelor of Engineering Computer Systems degree with Class Australian Institute of Company Directors, and currently serves on the Board of Directors for Meals on Wheels New South Wales, the Advisory Board for Habitat for Humanity Australia, and the James Cook University Singapore Advisory Board. In Singapore with her husband and 2 sons. Recorded. Chancellor, Ms. Andrea Della Matteo.
Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor and President, members of Council, members of staff, incredibly honoured to be here with you today to celebrate you and your achievements. Now, who would have ever imagined that a global pandemic would impact the world as it did? And yet, thanks to the incredible team at James Cook University and technology, of course, we all have the opportunity to be here with you today to celebrate you. Now, I've no doubt when you look back and you reflect upon the prior years, you'll probably filled with some mixed emotions. On the first day, that sense of excitement starting out on your degree, meeting new students, others who might become a future business partner. If you have dreams of graduation day, that sense of achievement, finally completing your degree. You know, when I look back and reflect upon my time memories, but what I remember most vividly, they were so proud of me, of my achievements, and they were so excited to see me graduate. And I simply could not have made it through my degree without their support. James Cook wasn't close to where I lived, and back then, in the 90s, we didn't have Snapchat, Instagram or TikTok, and yet I always knew my parents had my back and they were there. For some of you graduating today, you may know that. It's the advice you give, the values that you adulation. You've made it to graduation, where people are making a difference. So now that you've graduated, what's next? When there are very few females studying about spending time with young female students, female high school students in Sri Lanka. Those girls just blew me away with their hopes and dreams. But it takes real courage to realise that potential. And the world desperately needs you, now more than ever. Young, hopeful, fearless world, then you'll have lived a life worth living. Helping entrepreneurs to fulfil their dreams.
I invite Mr. Alex Marhill to present the 20...
Chancellor and gentlemen, fellow graduates, it is my great privilege and honour to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of my fellow graduates to Ms. Andrea Della Mattia. I am certain that I speak for us all when I say that we are inspired and empowered a lofty goal. You're reminded to us of the opportunities that await in the modern world, as well as the pitfalls. As the 2019 and 2020 graduates, we have learned a tremendous amount about a diverse range of failed after a period in the workforce, and to achieve, to take advantage of our friends. Tertiary education acted as our confidants when we questioned our own abilities and enabled our journey of growth and joy. Graduates, the common factor that binds us all together is the staff that we have learned from. Physics tells us that getting information out of a black hole is not possible. Thankfully, we have not needed to do that. Your dedication, professionalism, knowledge, and passion are examples for all of us to follow. You have implanted within us the seed of knowledge and laid it in the hopefully fertile soil that it deserves. Able to see further than you, it will be because it binds us. The 2019 and 2020 graduates here today is the fact that we have completed our degrees. Congratulations to us all. It is a failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. This resilience that Churchill describes throughout the rest of our lives. I would like to conclude with a brief glance at history. We are the beneficiaries of an inheritance that must be treasured, an inheritance that extends back to the great scholars of antiquity, that encompasses the Eastern and Western intellectual traditions and music and culture. It is an inheritance that includes the men and women of the Renaissance, and the great figures of the last century, that prefigures and postdates the dawn of rigorous science and medicine and the explosion of art and music. This inheritance encapsulates to all humankind. It is the ultimate tie that binds. This is our torch to bear throughout life. This day, therefore, not be the end of our journey. See.
Chancellor. I now have the pleasure of inviting Vice-Chancellor and President, Professor Sandra Harding, to deliver the closing address.
Chancellor, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, children, but most of all, our graduates. I am here to congratulate you, our graduates, and I do so most warmly and sincerely. You have achieved mighty by being here today. You have of your degree program, and you enter the world in a new way as a graduate. Congratulations, and those of everyone in this auditorium. We celebrate you and we honour. Second, I acknowledge and congratulate your parents, family, friends and supporters. Many here, pride of those here, their pride in you. This, a day that can seem like it's all about you. Certainly to love you, to help you, to guide you, and to provide what they could for you. But ultimately, their job is to let you become your own person. Until you become a parent, seeing you struggle and succeed, and not knowing how or if they can help, while hoping you make choices worthy of you, that watching is joyful and hard and sad and wonderful. Have had a similar job, to be there with you and for you, to help you along the way as best they can, but to let you be who you are and who you want to be. Graduates, my point is that this letting go is a very difficult task, and all these people here today or thinking of you from afar who have loved and supported you as long as they have taken moment. Strangely perhaps, the job of staff at the university is rather the same as those others we acknowledge today. While our engagement with you hasn't been for as long, we too have worked towards achieving your qualification. So I congratulate and thank my university colleagues for the important role they have played on your educational journey. Know that we're here to help you as a business of letting you go, to develop. And the late 1990s movie Sliding Doors, starring Gwyneth Paltrow, explored the consequences of making a particular choice. Whereas a different choice made at that same moment might have very different life consequences. It wasn't a great movie and far from a startling box office success, but that central idea about the possibility of different lives lived that I want to speak with you about. I put it to you that today, as you sit here, and for the rest of your professional life, there are two critical questions facing you. How you choose to respond to them is up to you and you alone. Together, your response, what you choose, will determine your life's course. Can you do what needs to be at the centre of this celebration? But they can do what needs to be done if you choose. But here's to be done. On those routine days, and for you as a having lived in it. Graduates, choose wisely. Goodbye.
Of this ceremony. Please observe COVID-safe distancing practices as you exit.